Put your headset on. Got your headset on?
I got it in.
Great. Hi, this is Carole Baskin, and this is Cat Chat. Today with me is Chelsea Feeny. She's the program manager at Big Cat Rescue, and I thought you guys might like to hear her story because people ask me all the time, how can I get a job working with big cats? And Chelsea is kind of the perfect example of how that happens. But before we get into that, and before the little kitten goes to sleep, she had just started telling you a little bit about our fostering program. And Chelsea is very involved in the fostering program because of her management of the interns. And so she also provides kitten sitting services while the interns are working or if they're off on their day. So I'll hand it over to you, Chelsea, and you can talk about the Fostering in School program.
Well, I did actually go over some of that while you were away. Just saying that we do work with a program called Fostering is Cool. We get kittens from just days old up until they are at least 2 pounds and healthy. So sometimes they're quite a bit older because we're waiting for them to get through respiratory issues or whatever. And the interns care for them, they feed them, they medicate them, whatever needs to happen to make sure they're healthy and happy and friendly so they can be adopted out. And we've had a really good success rate with the adoptions of all of our various kittens.
Look how perfectly her little face is divided right down the middle.
It is. I think she's going to go in a hurry. She's super sweet and she's very, very pretty.
She's a bit of a messy eater, though.
She is the messiest of eaters. She does not know how to eat without diving headfirst into the food, so she has to get a full bath every time she eats. She's a crazy girl. She's hungry. Sigh. She actually just ate before this, so she would be nice and clean for you all.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
You've been with us for quite a while. Tell everybody how you first came to hear about Big Cat Rescue and then how you first became involved.
Well, would have been probably about 2004. I came as a guest. I was on the feeding tour, and this is back when the feeding tour included guests actually feeding with tongs the big cats. Things that now from the other side I think, oh, I'm glad we don't do that. But at the time I thought that was really cool. And backing up our feeding tour was an intern from Australia. And you know, I'd gotten to hear her story of how she came and she was working and learning all kinds of things. And for some reason, it stuck in my head. It was never relevant to my career goals at that time, but it really stuck in my head. And then about 5 years later, I decided to make a significant career change. And the first thing I thought of was Big Cat Rescue. I decided I wanted to work with animals and thought that's the place to go. And so it was the very first place, and it happened to be the last place I interned when starting my career with animals.
What kind of a career path were you on prior to getting involved in animal care?
Well, originally I had a research background. I had a degree in psychology, and I worked with a variety of different organizations, but most notably I worked with the Institute of Cognition and Culture in Belfast, Northern Ireland, doing research there. I actually got published with them, and then I did neurology research in Iowa, and we did research on various kinds of issues you may have when driving, things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, drugs, alcohol, and how those impairments affected your driving skills and what kinds of interventions could help to improve those. And I just decided I didn't really enjoy it. I was not hugely fond of working with doctors, and thought I really wanted to do something else with my life, and animals were the very first thing that came to mind. I started working with nonprofits first. I worked with the Sierra Club, and I worked with AmeriCorps doing flood recovery work. So a variety of different experiences there as far as working with nonprofits, and then I finally decided animals were the place to be, and that's when I came to Big Cat.
Do you think any of the training that you had doing research, and especially I didn't know about the background that you had in psychology, I guess, for lack of a more specific term, do you find that those skills that you learned then or things that led you into that career path have helped you with the things that you do here now?
Oh, absolutely. My love of animals has little help with my job except for keeping me motivated. The skills that I learned on my career path are definitely what has allowed me to have the career here. I used to do the scheduling for all of the tours here at Big Cat, and that was all old hat for me because I did all the scheduling for our participants when I worked in neurology. So I was used to working with people and trying to schedule around their schedules and having people cancel and how do you do it and all of that. And Lily is chewing the tar out of me at the moment. Give me one
she
second.
Can go back in her basket if you like. Earlier we had a kitten sitter helping you there, but I see she has left.
All right, sorry about that. She needed to go take a nap. All right, so and then all of my database work that I do, because I also handle all of our donations intake and our donor tracking and everything, that all came from both actually the nonprofit world and from research, because I work with a lot of different databases. I've never worked specifically with the databases that I use here, but I worked with enough of them that the principles are the same. You just have to learn the specifics of each of those programs.
This is part of why I think you're such a perfect person to talk to about a career with animals, because I think an awful lot of people, maybe most people, think, wow, I really love animals and I'd really love to be out there taking care of them every day and feeding and cleaning and doing all of that stuff. And you only do that here as a volunteer. And so I think it's very important for people to realize that if they want a career working with wild animals anyway, the big charismatic animals, the cats and the wolves and the primates, that they need to have skills that will actually further the mission of the nonprofit that they get involved with far more than having a biology degree or a zoology degree, because people will do that sort of work for free, whereas the work that you're doing is stuff we would never be able to get people to do consistently for free.
That's true, and it's actually one of the interesting things. They always ask me what kind of background, and they think, oh, wild animal management or biology. And actually, I found psychology was an excellent background because I know the principles behind enrichment, behind operant conditioning. I know why we do what we do, and I'm able to convey that to our people. But also, I understand the precise nature of research, which is not all that different than donor databases or even the research that we do here. We do it less formally, but we do track how the cats react to various things and all of that. So it's important to us to know that those minute details are really important.
Where I thought you were going with that was that understanding how operant conditioning works with the big cats has helped you to understand how operant conditioning works with interns.
Oh, it's so much easier with the big cats. Oh, so much easier.
Meat on a stick.
Well, actually, a big part of what I do with the interns is all fairly new to me, and that's one of the reasons I'm currently getting my master's in industrial organizational psychology, which is
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's the human side of business. So it's how do you manage the people? How do you get the people to be motivated? How do you keep them happy? All those things that we're constantly struggling with volunteers, the basic principles have all been well established. And so that's what I'm studying now. And it's helped me a lot with the interns. I do a lot of, well, not a lot, but I do periodic sessions with the interns where we'll talk about different aspects of the program and get their opinions on things and work through various issues in a more positive way. And those are skills I've learned through my schooling.
That's very interesting. And I've really been impressed with recent changes in the intern program. One, it's doubled, and I think a lot of that is because the interns are so much happier now than they've ever been. And two, there seems to be much more cohesion between the interns, which is difficult because you've got sometimes 5 women, sometimes a male or 2, living in a single house together, and they have to share that very tight space and kitchen space and washer dryer time and all of those kinds of things, and yet they seem to be happier doing it now than they've ever done before. So do you think that these are skills that you are currently learning in your master's program that you're implementing, or is this kind of like a test tube for your studies?
Well, it's definitely, I use it as a tester for my studies, but as far as the housing stuff, that's been more trial and error. That's a matter of like, well, we tried this, that absolutely blew up in our faces, so let's try something different. And we're constantly trying new things with that. What we found now is that the more formal and the more oversight we keep with the housing and making sure that things are happy, the more happy they all are, and that because they don't get to build up those resentments towards each other about their messy house conditions, things like that, because they're always fighting about who did what dishes. So if we make them do it every week and we're constantly on them, then they don't have time to fight about it. They're just trying to get it done so that they can move on to doing something more fun. But that really has been trial and error. We try to give them as much space as we can, and then other times we have to really go in and be, mom and nag them constantly for those kind of things. So it really depends on the group. We've had a really remarkable group the last almost 2 years now, but certainly the last 12 months. It's just been remarkable, and they've taken very little work. But it does help with the skills. Sometimes when they don't get along, if you can address that very early on, they can get past it without it becoming an issue, whereas we used to just ignore it and figure they'd get through it, and they don't. A lot of our interns aren't old enough, they aren't mature enough to know how to go about that in a productive way, so they'd let it build up until it became a real issue.
I think some of the team building things that you've done with them here have really been a huge help to the intern program. Are those things that you came up with on your own, or how did what made you decide to start doing those?
Well, there's two different kinds of team building projects we do. One that we've been doing for a long time are called intern challenges. And those are kind of old hat team building exercises you used to use way back in camp. And we're always trying to throw in something new. We try to give it a big cat twist so it seems a little more relevant to what we're doing. But those are really fun, and Gail and I love those. We spend so much time sitting and talking about how we want to do it, and we're going to do it. She gets really into it, so those are fun, and we do those at least once a year. We try to do it 2 to 3 times a year, just depending on time. They do require a lot of time, both from Gail and I, and also obviously trying to get all the interns together at one time can be tricky. But we try to do that, and those are just fun games where they get to run and do crazy challenges, and those really actually help a lot to build teamwork. And then there's the more meeting style sessions that I've been having with them, and I only have those as issues come up. So I've done one approximately every 3 months for the past 6 months to 9 months. And it just depends. One we did was they were having some social issues, so we decided to get together and we just talked about what are the qualities that make up a good intern, and what are some of the areas that your fellow interns really excel in these areas. And I made them go around and say nice things about each one. And so having to look at the bright side of their fellow interns really helped them, and then they got a chance to kind of look at what areas they personally could improve. And that had an astounding effect on the interns as a whole. That was a really good, really productive one. And then we did one recently just about communication. We've had some communication issues, nothing major, but we thought we'd talk about it early on, and we actually came up, they've got some really good ideas of practical applications that can help communication. So that was really helpful for us as the people who manage them, even more so, I think, than it was for them.
Wow. We've been struggling with how to keep in contact with all of the interns who are handling the foster kittens to make sure that everybody is up to date on what's happening with them and which medications they're on, and making sure that their charts are getting updated and everything. And I've been Jamie and I've been struggling with, how do we reach everybody we need to reach in a certain house? And I'm thinking maybe this big speaker system where it's like this voice from God says, did you log your kitten chart today? Or it just beams into all of those rooms. I'm still struggling with how we're going to do that. So I'm glad to hear that communication is something that you guys are working on behind the scenes.
Well, and I recommend if you get the chance, ask the interns, what do you think is better? How do you recommend that we do this? How can we improve this? If you say, here's a problem, what do you recommend? It's surprising to me how often they have really ingenious ideas. You're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? That's great.
Yeah, because they're living right in the middle of it, so they really see what the problems are and what needs to be fixed.
And a lot of times they'll just say, oh, that's my fault, I'll be better.
Wow.
And that's even better. You're like, okay, good, that's great.
We kind of got way ahead of ourselves because it was just so interesting what you were saying. But you were on this career path. You came down here for a tour. You came back as an intern. Did we cover that part yet?
We didn't. No. Okay. So yeah.
I gave it a little.
That's okay. So about 5 years after I'd come for a tour, I thought, okay, I want to get into the animal industry. I knew from doing some research and from having spoken with the intern that one of the crucial things if you want to work with animals is that you have to do interning. You have to have experience. No one will hire you without experience. It's one of those career paths, and I'm always telling the interns, you're going to work for free for a long time to get a very low-paying job. You have to have
well,
this.
there's some incentive.
But, you know, they have to know that going into it. Some people think it's a real, you know, lucrative career. And unless you're going to go and stand on TV and, you know, play with cubs in front of people, it really isn't going to do it. You know, if you're doing the nitty gritty, picking up the poop kind of work, it's just not going to show you, you're not going to make the kind of money that some people think they might. So I want to be realistic at the very beginning, because if they don't want to do that, now's the time when they have the chance. So I figured I would have to do probably, you know, 4 separate internships for at least a year's worth of experience before I'd be able to even consider getting a job. And thankfully, you know, I was in a position where I could do that. So I came to Big Cat Rescue for an internship. I got 2009. I started 2009, yeah. March of 2009 is when I came for my internship. And I got about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks in, and that's when I got the job. So,
wow.
Yeah, I didn't even finish my internship. I started training right away.
Wow.
But there was a tricky one because I knew that I was qualified as far as the other skills I needed. But there's, you know, you don't want to step on toes. I was new. I didn't really have a lot of experience with animals. I thought, oh, so I waited a long time before I even said anything, because I figured there was someone else more qualified. And it happened to be that you were just having trouble filling that particular position. And it was one of the most unique job interviews I've ever had. I mentioned to Scott, because Scott was the operations manager back then, and I mentioned to him that I was considering it. He immediately turned around and called you. 5 minutes later, you pulled up, and we went on a walk around the sanctuary. And by the end of that, by the time we'd gotten back to the food prep, I'd had the job.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, that just happened. Wow. All right. But it was great. It was a really, really amazing opportunity, and I had discussed it at length with my husband, because he lived in Iowa at the time, and so there was a lot to be considered about how we were going to make that work.
As did you. I mean, you were here because you were an intern, but your whole life was in Iowa, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, the first year was really rough. I had 2 weddings that summer that I was maid of honor in, which for me by default means that I'm planning them. So there was a lot of work to be done on those. So when we talked about getting the job, that was one of the prerequisites, was that I would be able to leave for both of those weddings, because I had already made a commitment there. And then it was 3 years before my husband managed to sell the house and move down here.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, just for a little bit of background as to how this job opening came about, because one of the things you said is it really is a matter of being in the right place at the right time. And whenever we have a job opening, which is not very often, but when we do, we kind of look around and say, who do we see all the time? Who do we see out there working all the time that would be a good candidate for this position? And one of the things that I'm really, really good at is going out there and figuring out, you know, what's the next thing that we need to do, and how can we streamline stuff to make it more effective. And so we had purchased this software that it was a donor management software, and it was complicated and awful and expensive, but it was like the highest level of complicated and awful that we could afford at the time. And so I went in and I learned how to do it, and as quickly as I can, after doing something like that, I hand it off to somebody else and say, okay, this is your job now. And so I think Catherine Quass had that job at that time. She was dealing with all of the donors, and I guess this managed our database as well, didn't it?
Yes.
This was a product that we used called Exceed by Telosa, and nobody liked working with this product, but Catherine's husband got a job in D.C., and with very short notice, I was going to get that thing dumped back in my lap, and I did not want it back. I desperately did not want that job back. So I started looking around as to who here has any database management experience, and I think there had to have been something about you other than you just saying, hey, I've got that experience. I must have seen you doing like data entry into the spreadsheets we were doing paper release forms at the time. So was that something you were doing? How did I know that you did that stuff?
I don't know. I know the one thing that gave me the confidence to ask is that I had just won the SAVE Award.
Oh.
So that may have been a part of it. And the SAVE Award is our kind of Volunteer of the Month award that we give out. And it was one of those things that rarely gets given to an intern. And I thought, well, they must really like me. I feel a little more comfortable, putting myself out there for that. So that might have been part of it. But yeah, I did a lot of, kind of work for Catherine, just doing basic data entry kinds of things. It was very different back then. We used Excel a lot because because they would just import from Exceed, and Exceed had a lot of limitations, so she didn't want to have to teach anyone else. And
wow. The SAFE Award, for people that are not familiar, is an acronym for Scratch's Award for Volunteer Excellence. And Scratch was the oldest cougar who ever lived here. He lived to be 1 month shy of 30 years old, and so this award was named after him. Do you remember what you won the award for? Were we that specific back in 2009?
We only had 3 interns at the time, and it said something to the extent of leadership within the intern department.
Oh, wow. That turned out to be prophetic, didn't it?
It did. It did, absolutely.
Oh, gosh. And back when you joined as an intern, do you know how long our intern program had been around?
The intern program started in 2004.
Wow. And so by 2009, we only had 3 interns.
At that particular phase, like when I first came, we had probably 6, but there was the majority of my internship was with Tristan and Gemma, and that was just the 3 of us, and that's what I most remember. But yeah, we would have times where we'd only have 1. It really varied quite a bit, and it depended on the seasons.
And back then, were you guys working 6 days a week?
Yes.
So right now we have like what, 15 interns?
Yeah, currently we have 15 interns.
I can't even imagine what 3 interns trying to do the work of 15 interns must have been like for you.
It was crazy. It was long hours. There were a lot of tasks that we specifically were responsible for. We'd stay late. We'd come early. There was a very different perspective there as far as what our day-to-day life was.
And you're like allergic to everything, like grass and weeds and all of the stuff that you have to do as an intern. I don't know how you managed to do that and win the SAFE Award.
Just didn't mention it. It was fine. There were a few things. I mean, most things I can deal with. It's the grass that really kills me. So it just meant on those rare occasions, and then it was much less often that we were able to get in and actually mow one of those big enclosures. So it wasn't an issue as often as it is now. Now it's every day we're mowing something huge somewhere. But that's because we have the extra help and can. Back when I was an intern, it was about getting what needed to be done every day done, and the rest of it, you hoped you got to do something extra on that to-do list. That was really all there was, because there were just so few interns and even volunteers back then. I mean, we've grown quite a bit.
The intern program has grown substantially since then. When did you first get involved in managing the recruitment of the other interns?
Immediately. It was it was very awkward. It was a part of Catherine's job, so I took that over right away. And it was awkward at first because I transitioned from being an intern to being the intern manager immediately, and it was like, hey, I was a peer, now I'm your boss. This is awkward. But interns leave every 3 months, so it didn't take too long before that transition happened. And I actually jotted down some notes. In 2010 and 2011, we had approximately 23 interns. But in 2012, we had 44 for the year. And then this year, so far to date, we've had 48, and I already have another 11 set up for the rest of the year.
Wow. Oh, that is wonderful.
So we've tripled.
I know some of the people who watch this are people that run other sanctuaries, and I hear so frequently that we're so lucky because we're close to the airport and we are close to civilization, so it's easy for us to get interns and it's easy for us to get volunteers. But I think the intern program is something that can work no matter how far removed you are from civilization, because as you've seen, the housing that we provide is pretty modest, and yet people are still willing to come and live in those Spartan conditions in order to have that experience working with the animals.
Absolutely. I don't think that I think our location helps a lot for volunteers. I absolutely think they're right there. It makes it much easier than if people always have to drive 2 hours. But the interns, even though they're close to a lot of things, rarely leave. You know, they're pretty much just hanging out and trying to catch up on their sleep or play with their kittens or do whatever it is they need to do on their day off. And, you know, we have interns that come from all over the world. It's really remarkable the number of different countries that they're all coming from, and it gets more and more broad as the years go by. I'm always impressed at how many more countries we include every year. And they aren't interested in how close we are to the airport or how close we are to other things. We pick them up at the airport, so even if it were 2 hours away, it would still require, you know, little to nothing from them because they would just get a ride. And, you know, when we need to, we give them grocery store trips. We'll take them in the van and do all of that. I think the major thing that helps with our intern program is that in comparison to other programs, we're the cheapest. As much as we are a remarkable program, but also we don't charge the interns. We give them free housing, we pay for their groceries, and we don't charge them. We can do that because we've been so successful. But I think it's what sets us apart from the other sanctuaries when they're really looking at it.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head with the next thing I was thinking, which is you have the ability to choose the cream of the crop. And I think that probably has a lot to do with how much easier our intern program may be to manage than at other places where they're taking anybody who fills out an application.
Well, and we didn't used to get to be as selective. Now that we do have as many applications as we get through, the application process is more complicated now, and that's on purpose. It's so that, you know, can you follow instructions? Can you get through this process? Okay, great, then you'll work at Big Cat Rescue. Because if you can't follow basic instructions, you're not going to succeed as an intern at Big Cat Rescue. It's just not going to happen. And then we do make them come for an in-person interview if they're from Canada or the United States. Other countries, we do Skype interviews. So there's a variety of different ways that we filter them through, but absolutely we get to be much more picky than we used to be, and that helps us remarkably in how easy they are to manage.
I think there for a while you were kind of pulling your hair out because the largest percentage, I'm guessing, of our interns are people who have just left high school for the first time. They've left their homes for the first time. It's the first time they don't have their mother doing their laundry and their dishes for them. And I remember when you came to me and said, I want to make this process harder online so that I don't even look at the application until they get through a certain percentage of it, because, like you said, if they can't follow directions, then we don't want them anyway. So I think that was a great move on your part, and one that probably was counterintuitive. If you're having trouble getting good people, you might think more hand-holding is what you need. And yet, in this case, what it proved was what you need is for the people who really qualify to be the ones that get through that process.
And yeah, the biggest problem wasn't so much that I wasn't getting good people, it was that I was wasting my time on ones who I knew would never make it through. You know, and you know, they're like, well, I need this and I need that, and there was all these different pieces of the application, and I have to ask them for each one individually, and I was like, there's no way you're going to succeed here. We should just stop right now. And so that's the way the application process is now. If you don't give me a completed application, I don't even look at it. If I don't get every single piece, I don't even consider you. I don't even know that you were in the process because it hasn't even crossed my desk at that stage. So it's very different, and it's been incredibly successful. It's really good, and we have an older general age for our applicants now than we used to. So
do you think that's a result of being able to follow the directions, or what would be causing that?
I think it's a variety of things. I think it has to do with the fact that we're, you know, getting just the cream of the crop, and the cream of the crop tends to be a little more experienced. They tend to be a little older. We also we're a much wider berth of, you know, exposure. We get people much later in their years, and they're doing career changes like I did, or they're just looking for something different and fun to do. You know, they aren't really concerned about making money. They just want to do something that's rewarding and give back. And those are really very different applicants than the, you know, I'm just trying to get school credit kind of applicants that we used to get. And I don't have to teach people how to do laundry anymore, so that's good.
Are there words of advice that you would give to someone who is wanting to do an internship based on the experience you've had both as being an intern and as screening interns?
Well, there's a few. When looking at internships, I recommend looking at a wide variety because you're going to have very different experiences everywhere you go. And just because you have one bad experience doesn't mean that the next one isn't going to be amazing. And some of them are going to help you to figure out that roadside zoos are not the same as a sanctuary, or that, you know, actual zoos are not the same. And so you want to kind of figure out where are you most comfortable and what are you most interested in so that you can better focus your future goals. But as far as the actual application process, if you don't know how to write a cover letter or a resume, Google it. It's really basic. I can't tell you many people, I'm like, how did you not? There's the internet. Nothing is that difficult anymore. I don't expect perfection from them. They're often very young, but when they're just like, well, how do I do that? I'm like, you don't ask me that. You ask Google that. Google will tell you exactly what you need. And, you know, insider tip, do not have your mom or dad call me.
Here's your tip of the day.
It is a tip that a lot of people need to hear, but if you are not mature enough to call me yourself and ask the questions that you have, you know, you're just not ready for this. This is an adult situation, and we really need people who can care for themselves. Parents mean well, but the minute your parent calls me, I'm asking your name and you go on a list. So, insider tip.
You transitioned us from this Telosa software to the most expensive and most complicated donor management program out there, which is Razor's Edge. Do you have words of advice for people who are running nonprofits as far as the differences in the types of software that you use, as far as the complexity and the kind of people that you use to operate that?
Oh, that is a big question. It varies significantly depending on your needs. When we were smaller, when you first got Exceed, you know, Razor's Edge was too much. One of the biggest things I can tell you is take the time when you're doing the transition to properly prep your information. Because one of the problems we have now is that there are limitations in what we can do in Razor's Edge based on how it was imported from Exceed. And if we had really done our due diligence properly and formatted that information the way it needed to be formatted before we put it into Razor's Edge, we'd be in a very different place here as far as what kind of information we could actually get. We're limited now because of, you know, basic things like Exceed used to, they wouldn't let you put relationships on your particular constituent files. So rather than having, you know, Mary Smith and John Smith as two separate ones that were connected, we put them in as Mary and John. Well, when we imported into Razor's Edge, we did it the same way. And so now, even though Razor's Edge has all the capability to be able to do that, we have, you know, tens of thousands of entries that are all set up that way. So for consistency purposes, we just continue to do it that way because once it's in Razor's Edge, it's too much of a nightmare to try to fix. But, you know, had we known what I know now, we'd have done it differently.
And that's all based on the training for that software, that if we had done more training up front before we tried to move the database, that we could have resolved a lot of those issues.
Well, and a lot of it had to do with the weird timing situation because technically, you know, Catherine really handled that big shift. But she was trying to get all of that done before she left so that she didn't leave me in the middle of a giant mess, which I greatly appreciate. But, you know, had Catherine had more time to be able to do it properly, I think it would have been done differently as well. And she and I have talked about it since then. She's like, oh, yeah, I would have done it, you know, totally differently. But, you know, you have limitations. Sometimes you have to do that. But, you know, for other people...
That would have been weeks of training for her that she just didn't have because she had to leave town.
Yep.
Well, she didn't have to leave town, like, because she was on the run. No, she was joining her husband in D.C.
Yep, and it's a great testament to the organization as a whole that people like Catherine come back. She moved back to Florida, and she's back, and she's, you know, out here every day doing you know, green shirt keeper work, and she still helps me. She's a great help with Razor's Edge. She does a lot of data entry for me and things. So it's just a real testament that when people leave, they don't feel like they can't come back. You know, we're still welcoming enough that they can, and not a lot of places are like that, I know.
And on that note, that's one of the things about the intern program that has really changed in the last couple of years, which is we now have different levels of internship and people coming back. I think you're up to like a level 4 now.
We are. When I first started, we had returning interns, and they called them level 2s, but they really just continued to do the same work that they did as a level 1. They just loved it so much they came back to get a little more experience. And we made that a little more formal and shifted it to being an actual level 2, which meant that they got to progress in their training, and they work with cougars. And then we had so many people coming back for a level 2, and specifically had one intern from Australia who was really looking to continue on, that we created a level 3. And level 3s actually get to work with lions and tigers. And in work with, I mean clean and really just clean. They get to clean them. And then we have just
And you do not mean bathe them.
No, I mean pick up their poop when they're not around. But then with our level 4, which we have just started, and we will, our first ever level 4 starts Monday.
And who will that be?
Brittany Green. She's our first ever level 4. She's been with us for almost a year now. By the time she finishes, it'll be over a year, because each internship is 12 weeks long. And she will, as a level 4, will get to feed the big cats who are locked out, and she will get to learn some about our medication process, as well as getting to learn some of the advanced enrichment and operant conditioning we do with the larger cats.
That's wonderful that you've worked in incentives for people to come back and do those extra levels, because you're right. I think that before, when we were not offering anything except more of the same, we weren't getting a whole lot of people that wanted to keep coming back. But now it's great, because when people come back, we know that they have that basis training and all of the stuff that led them up to the level that they're now qualifying for.
Absolutely. Another problem we had was that for those who did want to stay longer, because they didn't have any other progress that they could make, they got angsty, for lack of a better word. So, those were some of the times when we had some of the internal intern issues. They just weren't being challenged, and anytime you don't challenge someone, they have a little more time to think about causing problems here or there, or just being a little more upset about things that usually wouldn't bother them. And that was one of the major reasons why we changed it to being a much more formal program, because I made a very strict rule that we would not accept anyone back who wasn't going to progress, because we had just learned on multiple occasions that it was nothing but trouble.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but if we challenged them and gave them new things to learn and places to head towards, it was completely different.
That's part of how we came up with the 3-month program for the internship, is that the first 3 months that people are working here is when they seem to put their all in all into it. And so we figured, okay, we'll just let them come for 3 months and get the best out of them before they start becoming a problem.
I had no idea. I thought
Timmy and I had long discussions about, all right, when do we see people just tailing off and really becoming a problem?
That's so funny, because I always assumed it had to do with the international program.
No, we didn't know anything about the international program before you took it on.
All right. Well, it worked out really well, because our internationals, if they're traveling on a waiver, can only have 90 days. So the 12 weeks works perfectly within there. So I just assumed that those two were related, but it's good. It's interesting to know that that was just kismet.
Speaking of the internationals, we are participants in the Combined Federal Campaign, which is a program where nonprofits can be listed in a book where, if you work for the government, and you want auto deductions out of your paycheck to go to charities, you can pick from the ones that are in the book. And so Big Cat Rescue is able to be in their national, actually international books. So not only do we appear in the Florida book, but we also appear in all of their books around the world, all of their stations, everywhere that they have military bases. And that, you probably know this figure better than I do, but I'm thinking that generates somewhere between $100,000 and $130,000 a year. Is that correct?
And it grows every year; it gets bigger.
But Absolutely. part of qualifying to be in all of those books is that you have to show that you provide services in 15 different states or in another country. So this is a huge part of the intern program, by being able to have interns from, I think we've had interns from 22 states now.
Oh, I'm sure.
And 10 countries, I believe, was the last one that we sent in. So that ensures us being able to qualify for so much more of that incoming revenue. And if you don't have an intern program, that's one really good reason why you should.
Absolutely. It's incredible the amount of money we get from that, and it requires a lot less of the day-to-day upkeep than a lot of the other programs, because CFC handles the receipting and things. We thank them, but we don't get those lists until almost 2 years after they've signed up.
Wow.
So by the time we finally thank them, it's long past when they would have needed any sort of, receipt or whatever. But it does get deducted directly from there, so the receipts aren't as critical. But it requires a lot less of our input than a lot of other kind of employee programs do. We have probably 45 separate employee giving programs that we participate in, and each one has its own rules and regulations and how we do it. And some of them we only have one donor in each of those. And then whereas you're talking about CFC, we've got thousands and thousands of donors, and they're amazing that they just keep coming through. And the big part of that is that we have Jeff, who's our director of donor appreciation, who actually goes out and visits with them. But on my end, as far as having to keep track of all the data, it's so much easier than a lot of the other ones that we do. So I love that.
And speaking of things that you do, we've only talked about 2 things that you do, but you do a lot more than that. So kind of give us a day in the life of Chelsea Feeny.
Day in the life of Chelsea Feeny is different every single day. I have 3 main jobs that I cover. One is obviously the intern program. I recruit, screen, and orient. So I give them orientation for all of our new interns. I also do all of our donor database. So I take all of the donations as they come in, I put them into the database, I receipt them, recognition, things of that nature. And then I also, this is a recent addition, is that I now do our new volunteers, which is very similar as far as getting them situated and on the program as what I do with the interns, but in a lot of ways incredibly different. It is both more difficult and easier. It's really hard to say, but once an intern signed up, they're pretty well set, and we know we're going to get them on a path. Whereas our volunteers, because it's a weekly commitment for them, sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, and they often don't know until they try. So that is a constant job of texting them, calling them, checking in with them, making sure they're still on track to get all the training that they need, setting up teachers, doing all of that. And I find it really rewarding. I really love meeting all the new people. Before I used to handle all of our reservations, and thankfully I hated that part of my job. So Carole was nice enough to allow me to change as we had some personnel shifting, and now we have a company that does that, and I think they do a much better job than I do because there's more than one of them, and that's always helpful.
There's a whole floor of them.
Well, and that was what same with everything. We just keep growing and growing and growing, and so what used to be a relatively small job became more and more demanding. And with the reservations, you got to get back to those people right away. And between orienting our interns and trying to keep up with donations, it just wasn't possible. So thankfully that's been moved on, but that's one of the things I've gotten to take on is this new volunteer thing. And before I did that, I never met any of the new ones. They would come and go, and I'd never even was like, who was that? I don't know, because it just wasn't part of it. But now I get to meet a ton of new people. I really get to keep track of how they're doing, and it's a really unique side of things. I think that volunteer management is actually significantly more complicated than intern management.
And why do you think that?
Well,
are you bouncing your desk? I'm seeing your screen bounce.
Oh, I probably am. Sorry. My screen's a little touchy. All right. So the big thing with interns is they're a captive audience. They're here all day, every day. They do what we tell them to do. So their classes are easy. We can schedule their classes weeks in advance because we know exactly where they're going to be. Whereas the volunteers have to work around their real-life schedules. And those can be crazy and change constantly, and it's really hard for them. And then things come up, normal life things. Their parents are in the hospital, or they break their foot, or a variety of other different things. We have a lot of students, and finals come around, and suddenly they're nowhere to be found. And so it's really hard to keep up with them and make sure that they're still able to come in, and for normal practical reasons. But it's very demanding and so much more difficult. Once we get the intern here, we're pretty much set. We know exactly what their timeline's going to be and how they're going to progress through the program. Volunteers are nowhere near like that.
It has created, it's why we have been devoting more resources to trying to build our intern program, is because we really need people that are so reliable. And it's not that volunteers aren't reliable. They're giving the best that they can give because of all of those outside influences. But every day those cages have to be cleaned, and the cats have to be fed, and the tours have to be given. And we've got to make sure that there's enough people here to do that, because we don't pay anybody to do that kind of work.
Absolutely. I think that there is a huge benefit of having volunteers like we do. We have volunteers who've been here over 10 years. And the wealth of knowledge and experience and just their very intricate knowledge of the cats is irreplaceable. I mean, you could not have the same kind of medical observations that we have of these cats and be able to intervene as quickly as we do with new people all the time. But as a combination, as you're saying, on the day-to-day, they can't always be here. They have 9-to-5 jobs. They're, doing the thing. So I think that we've got a really good balance of it. And, we're just constantly trying to grow both programs as quickly as possible, because, the more people we have, the more we can do to really help the cats.
I know I see you up in the gift shop around tour times a lot, and I've been impressed with your, you almost have to be like a traffic cop in there, directing traffic, getting people moved through the process of signing in and getting them onto the right tours and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience is like, what it is that you do when you're doing that?
Absolutely. The most important part of that is really understanding what our process is and exactly which steps happen where. I'm a little like you in that I find the ways to make things more efficient, so I'm constantly trying to make things easier. Other people will add steps that aren't necessary, and I'm really quick to be like, nope, we're not adding that. That's just extra mess. Don't do that. And I typically am only up there during our really crazy seasons, spring break, and then the closer to Christmas you get, the crazier we get, and that's when we most need that traffic cop. And that's what I do. I just go there and I do not fill any of the normal roles. I just make sure that things are progressing the way they need to. The steps are that they first get greeted at the gate. We will make sure that they don't have any children or pets in the car if it is not a child accessible tour. And we'll find out whether or not they're handicapped and need any additional assistance, because we have a whole process for that as well. Then we'll park them, and that can be a nightmare in itself depending on what the weather is or how many people we have, because when it's rainy season we lose half our parking lot to a giant water hole, and then when we're busy we don't have enough parking for everyone. We're getting them in nice and tight, and we're very strict about it so we can get everyone in. And then we're going to move them up to the actual sign-in, where we're going to see if they have a reservation. We're going to sign them in, make sure that they're filling out the liability waiver, which is now electronic. And if they don't have a reservation, we're going to make sure to have them pay. And then from there, they're going to get split up in various groups. We do groups by wristband color. And then we're going to send the groups out. We have to make sure that they get the rules before they go out, and we want to make sure that they go out in a timely fashion, so as not to hold up other groups, and also so that they return in a timely fashion. So it's just a matter of balancing all that and making sure you got people where you need them, because we're constantly stealing people from various roles to send them out on the tours. Because the same people who greet them at the gate and park them in the parking lot and sign them in are the ones who are giving their tours 10 minutes later. And so you have to make sure that as you're shifting people around, you've got someone else to fill that spot.
That was one of I tend to just stand up there and lurk. I'm just watching, all right, what's working, what's not working here. And one of the things that really struck me was the amount of coordination that has to go into making sure that as the numbers of people that are showing up for the 3 o'clock tour start to diminish and we think we're at the end of it, that you are utilizing those last people that were checking them in to then get those tours out onto the tour pass. And it's like, dang, that's hard. And it's all being done in your head. It's not like there's spreadsheets for it or anything, because it changes every day.
It does. And there's the added addition of training. In addition to actually helping our guests and giving them great tours, we're also training new tour guides every single day. And so you have to keep track of who's in training, who's qualified to train, who's qualified to sign people off. So there's a ton of coordinating, as you say, that goes into the gift shop. And I only help, when we're really busy. We have many really talented volunteers who help to do that, and then of course Honey, our gift shop manager, is more than capable of doing that as well. So yeah, I only really help when it's overwhelming and we've got a ton of people, because that's one of those things I'm good at, pushing people out the door. I'm much better at telling people you need to leave now in a way that gets them to leave without being offended, where some of our volunteers are like, can you go maybe? And they don't leave, and then we're 10 minutes delay, and a lot of our volunteers don't understand what 10-minute delay does during our peak seasons, but it can throw you off an hour.
Two things about your physical appearance. One is I always look to see what kind of braids you're wearing. I think those are just so cool. And the other is the fact that you're wearing a green shirt. And so that designates your volunteer presence here. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a green shirt and what you do as a green shirt?
Absolutely. We have 3 different levels of volunteering. We have our red shirts, which are our trainees, and they're just going to learn basic stuff about Big Cat Rescue. At about their 2-month mark, they get to decide whether they want to work as a partner, which would be in the gift shop, or helping with tours, doing off-site events, and a whole variety of things I couldn't even begin to name, or our keeper side, which of course work directly with the animals, doing cleaning and feeding and so forth. If they do decide to go into the keeper side, they'll learn as a red shirt to work with lynx, Siberian lynx, or smaller. All of those cats are our red shirt designated cats. After they have been a red shirt for 6 months, they can move on to get a promotion as a yellow shirt. Yellow shirts are known as either partners or keepers, and on the keeper side, we'll work with cougars or smaller. Red shirts have to do a minimum of 4 hours of volunteer work a week, so 16 hours a month. Yellow shirts, it's 6 hours a week. And then after you've been a yellow shirt for a year, you can get promoted to a green shirt. And a green shirt has to work 8 hours a week, and on the keeper side can work with lions, tigers, and leopards. So it's at least a 1.5 year experience before you're going to be promoted to a green shirt. And all of the staff have to do their volunteer work in addition to their staff hours. So for the shirt that I am wearing, I earn that as with my volunteer hours, not with my staff work. And that's something that a lot of our interns especially don't fully understand. But we're here all day, every day, just like they are. It's crazy. This is not a 9-to-5 schedule by any means. But it's much more flexible as well, at least for my position, so that's nice. I only have to be here when I have new volunteers or interns. Otherwise, it's all pretty flexible. And as you know, I'm sometimes here way into the wee hours of the night.
I can't even count how many times I've walked out and it's been dark here and you're still working in your office.
And the closer it gets to Christmas, the more often that happens, just because we've got so many wonderful donors who love to give during that time period. So, yeah, that's. But what I do, mostly what I do is feeding. I help with feeding, especially during the winter hours when we feed closer to 4. It's a lot harder for our volunteers who have those typical 9-to-5 jobs to be able to feed during that time period. So during the winter, I feed almost every day. And then during the summer, I feed based on when we need it. I'm on call with Gail. She just texts me and says, can you feed tonight? And I'll come and feed. On occasion, I will clean, although lately, because of the volunteer schedule, that happens less and less. But in theory, I am capable of cleaning.
And when you say volunteer schedule, is it because there's more people that are out there doing it now that you don't need to be called for cleaning?
That depends on the day. Mostly it's because of the red shirts. Every month I get a new batch of new volunteers, and I have to be available when they're here. So depending on what their schedules are, they often come in the mornings. So that's when I have to be up in the gift shop to be able to give classes or get them oriented or whatever it is that we're doing that particular day. So it's a very hectic schedule, but it's the way I like it. I don't like doing the same thing every day. So it's good to get to change it up. But yeah, so that's what I do as a green shirt. I also get to do things like enrichment and operant conditioning, and I love to get involved when we do special events. Like we have the Haunted Trail coming up in October, and that's going to be a ton of fun. So I'm constantly doing new and interesting things. That's part of what I love out here, is that it's never the same.
There is a huge array of what you do, and one of the things I wanted to point out was you were talking about how important it is to move the tours out in groups as fast as you can without them bumping into each other. But especially during the short days of the year, the fall and winter, you've got to be able to get your last tour in before your feeding tour or your feeding group or your feeding staff goes out. And that's really tough to do if they're leaving at 3 and getting them back in exactly at 4:30.
We don't leave any wiggle room in the winter because our normal afternoon tours go out at 3 o'clock. They're an hour and a half tour, and our feeding tour goes out at 4:30. And the feeding tour starts where the day tour ends, so you can't have them both at the same time. So we're very strict on our timeline, especially during the winter, because it's that tight, absolutely.
You can't have them at the same time because sometimes people are on both tours. They came for a regular tour and then a feeding tour, and also because sometimes you get the same people leading the tour that are leading the feeding tour.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a limited number of people who are qualified to give our specialty tours, and that would be our keeper tour and our feeding tour. It's getting more and more. We've made it part of earlier stages of our volunteer process over the last probably year. So we're getting more and more people trained, but it's always an issue to have people out for those tours. So yeah, when you're limited on your tour guides, you gotta turn them right around. Saturdays are like that as well. We have a 9 a.m. kids tour and a 10 o'clock adult tour. The 9 a.m. kids tour is 1 hour long, and I can't tell you the number of times we'll send an intern out on the 9 a.m. kids tour. They get back and they immediately go out to take that 10 o'clock adult tour out as well.
Wow.
So it's a very demanding job. No matter what position you're at Big Cat Rescue, you're going to be utilized all the time.
You had mentioned way back earlier in the conversation about how it took 3 years for you to be able to sell your home and move your husband down here. So I think that shows a tremendous level of commitment because you weren't able to go home that often during that period of time, as I recall.
No, I almost never went home. But my husband has a really flexible career. He does computer programming, so he can do that from anywhere. So he'd come down once a month. He'd spend, somewhere between a weekend and a week, here in Florida once a month. The trick was all the animals, because there was various progress through all of our pets. Of course, I have a million pets, because that's who I am. But as are most Big Cat rescuers. But there was a stage where he had all the animals, and then once we got things settled here, I took all the cats, but he still had the dogs, and then
these are big dogs.
They are. I have 2 huskies. Absolutely, they're big dogs. And so then there was the transition when we finally sold the house. We transitioned the dogs over, and then we finally bought the house in Florida. So it's been a long process, and it's always a little different. It was never quite the same. Probably every 6 months to a year, something significant was changing, just getting us ever so closer to being finally settled here in Florida.
Working at Big Cat Rescue, if you have a spouse or significant other, you can just about count on them being pulled into duty as well. So I know Lynn has handled a lot of our IT issues.
Yes, absolutely. And, he's on call for me anytime I need him. I'm like, hey, something's acting up. I need you to help me out. So he's often coming in and helping me fix things. I'm old school when it comes to technology. If I can make it work, I want to. A lot of other people are like, just buy new. I don't like that. I'm weird. I'm a weird person for my generation in that I want to make things work as long as I possibly can.
You probably have one of the oldest computers here.
I do, and I've upgraded certain pieces of it to keep it running and working the way it is, and to a large extent that's how I like it. You've offered to buy me a new one. I don't want to deal with Windows 8, so
And who can blame you? Oh my goodness.
Oh no, it's a nightmare. So yeah, he definitely comes in. He helps out with some of the bigger manpower projects as well on occasion. He's kind of an advocate without the advocate. His big thing is that he doesn't want to be formal. I don't know why. He's weird. So anytime Gail needs particular help, she'll have him come out. He's good with carpentry and things like that, so he builds some things for her on occasion. But
your house was like 100-year-old. It was a classic.
Yeah, the house we owned. The house we owned in Iowa was built in 1890. And we both remodeled and restored it. Depending on which room it is, some of them are better to restore and some are better to remodel. Kitchens, bathrooms, you want to remodel. Everything else you want to restore. So we have considerable skills when it comes to all of that, and I will never ever buy a house that needs that much work again. We didn't even get to live in it finished. We barely finished it and then sold it because it was crazy. So yeah, I won't ever do that again. But I learned a ton of information on it.
We have 1 minute left. What
Okay.
is one thing that you would like people to know about you, or you think people might not know about you?
That's a really complicated question.
Especially for only a minute.
It is. I have a considerable psychology background, and it's a huge influence on who I am and how I function. And I think that anyone who has psychology understands just how critical it is when working with animals. And it's always funny to try to explain to people who aren't. So if you're looking to get with animals, don't discredit psychology as a real good foundation to start from, because you'll be surprised at how relevant it really is.
Well, those are great parting words of advice. Thank you so much for joining
You're
us today,
welcome.
Chelsea.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.